Can the Baltimore Ravens survive with injuries to Marlon Humphrey and Ronnie Stanley? We talk about the latest on those guys and much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens. We're here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Free and available all podcasting platforms, including on YouTube. You know the drill here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're coming to you after the Ravens' disappointing and some aspects pretty disgusting loss to the Cleveland Browns 33-31 in Week 10. Baltimore had golden opportunities and just could not capitalize, suffered injuries throughout the day as well. Here to talk about that with me, he was here with me on Friday. He's back again for Monday. It's more Baltimore Ravens wide receiver Super Bowl champion Qadry Ismail and Q. Rough one all the way around. Baltimore gets out to the big first half lead and then squanders the opportunity in the second. Feels like they were out physicaled in the trenches, both offensively and defensively. And on top of the fact that they lost the game, at the time of this recording, we don't know. We're talking right after the game. But if there are serious injuries to Marlon Humphrey and Ronnie Stanley and some of the replays don't look super promising, could be some absences for both those guys, whether it's a week, multiple weeks, months, or maybe even the season.
Well, when it comes to this Ravens ball club, I guess you got to expect the unexpected. One of the frustrations that I have with this ball club is that, you see that they have figured things out, or you see that they have righted the ship to be that upper tier, elite ball club. And then you have a division opponent and you are literally ready for the knockout punch. First play of the game. I mean, my God, it's not even a minute into the game and you're up on them. And then you come back and have an amazing, 39-yard Keaton Mitchell touchdown run. And all is in your corner. You're showing the world that, look, we are going to be this formidable opponent. You better bring your A game. And it just fell apart. I mean, you're absolutely right. The injuries is one thing that we can talk about, but when it comes to the being out physical on both sides of the ball, it just reeks. And I'm kind of scratching my head trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, and I think there are definitely multiple things we can get to with the game for sure, especially with just how I'm still kind of wondering how they blew this one. But the injuries, I think, are a big part of this story. Now, again, we're coming to you. This is our Monday episode, but we're recording this on Sunday evening. So John Harbaugh said that he had no updates on Marlon Humphrey or Ronnie Stanley. Those are the two big ones. Humphrey goes down, a non-contact injury. Let's start there, Q. It didn't look good on the replays. He goes down, grabs the back of his lower leg. So a lot of people are starting to wonder, is that an Achilles? Is it a calf strain? What could that injury look like? Now, he came into this game with a hamstring issue, and I feel like if this is an Achilles or is something with the lower leg, as it seems, was that some sort of overcompensation for I don't even know if it was the leg, to be honest. I'm not sure. But if it was the same leg, what can you kind of say about what that injury looks like? And if it is something where he has to miss multiple weeks, multiple months, or even the year, what does that recovery timeline look like, especially if it is the worst fear? Hopefully not, knock on wood, but if it is the worst fear, which could be an Achilles.
I think from a standpoint of the non-contact injury, as you know, I do missile training. As you know, part of missile training is identifying bad, faulty patterns. With bad, faulty patterns comes hamstrings, lower back, knee, and Achilles. I got into an understanding via what is called GOTA, greatest of all time actions. Literally being a GOTA coach, certified coach, the whole nine, we look at so many hours of video and identifying what bad motor patterns look like. And when you see an athlete, and I've seen it time and time again, no contact whatsoever, and they grab and that heel gets locked into the ground, they're going forward as the heel goes down. So you got two opposing forces. It reeks of non-contact injury that more than likely is going to be season ending. And so, it could be a calf strain, but if it is a calf strain, if it is that, then you still are looking at significant weeks. But he plays a position where he needs to be able to be as multiple directional dynamic as possible. He is a corner. That is an explosive, going backwards, then, dynamically turning and breaking into the ground. And if you plant that foot into the ground one way, if it's a calf and you're coming back, still going to be something. But unfortunately, I think it might be that Achilles just because of the way in which he held on to it. And that's the unfortunate part. It's not me sitting here, trying to be right. I hope I'm wrong, but I know what I know when it comes to watching videotape over and over again.
Yeah, and it's really tough because you mentioned the calf strain. I kind of mentioned it with the question. Karl-Anthony Towns, I mentioned this on our live show we did yesterday, but Karl-Anthony Towns suffered a calf strain with the Minnesota Timberwolves against the Washington Wizards last year. It was kind of the same situation where it feels like you're almost like getting kicked, and you look back and you're like, well, who just hit me in the back of my lower leg? And it's that pop. But Towns suffered everyone thought it was an Achilles, but Towns suffered the calf strain. But you mentioned it, Q. Karl-Anthony Towns took about 4 or 5 months to recover from that injury, to come back. Marlon Humphrey would probably be done for the season if it was a calf strain. Obviously, I just think the difference is a calf strain for next season. When you start looking ahead to then, the Achilles recovery, I think, is a little more difficult, at least from my knowledge, and maybe yours as well, with the Achilles versus the calf strain. But let's move on to Ronnie Stanley quickly. Got rolled up on and pounds the turf in a lot of pain. People worry. I don't think I saw a replay of that one. Maybe there was one on the game, but I didn't see it. Gets up, walks very slowly off, goes to the medical tent, obviously doesn't come back. What are kind of your fears with that one? And do you feel like he's in jeopardy of missing this game against the Bengals? Again, we don't know anything right now, but this game against the Bengals, maybe more.
Yeah, that one is definitely concerning because of the fact of his previous injury history and the ankle, the way it got rolled up on. He obviously had some knees that had rolled up on as well. I just think that, for Ronnie, he's one of those guys that he's tough. Obviously, he's playing, this sport that's a violent sport. But when it comes to being cautious, there's no other person more cautious to come back than Ronnie Stanley. So, I mean, the way he was kind of wreathing in pain and all that, I mean, at minimum, this might be a 3-gamer at minimum. And so I don't foresee him coming back against Cincinnati. And that's some tough news because you got a defensive front that is formidable. And that's, putting it lightly. And I know that they're going to be salivating at the bit after getting beat and whooped by the Texans. And so I just think overall, you're kind of like, from one thing as far as Marlon Humphrey, obviously now with Ronnie Stanley being out, and you're hoping that, Daniel Faalele, he kind of came in there and spelled him. But, I am like, oh, boy, here we go. Let's see how it all unfolds. But this is a tough one.
Yeah, it is. And it wasn't just Stanley and Humphrey. Kevin Zeitler goes down. He has to leave the game. Travis Jones as well. We saw Zay Flowers and Jadeveon Clowney both leave. Now, Flowers and Clowney came back in the game. But it was a rough day health-wise for the Ravens. And coming up, we'll be talking about if the Ravens can survive, if these are serious injuries, season-ending injuries. Can they survive without Marlon Humphrey and Ronnie Stanley on the field? So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by Gametime. And I've had plenty of frustrating ticket buying experiences throughout my life. I Sometimes wasn't sure if the seats I was getting were good. Sometimes couldn't even find last-minute tickets, and there were just no good deals other places too. But you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And the Gametime app is awesome. There are so many events in the Baltimore area, obviously. Rough game for the Ravens on Sunday against Cleveland, but there is a Thursday night game coming up at M&T Bank Stadium, so you can find tickets for that, concerts, and so many other things as well. Plus, Gametime has last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals. It's easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. Plus, they have views from all seats in the venue and the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and more. So, Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you a complete peace of mind with your purchase. They have all-in prices that show you your total upfront, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. Plus, they're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on your tickets. With zone deals, you pick the section and Gametime picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with the Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spelled LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guarantee. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher is still here with Kadri Ismail talking Ravens. Their 33-31 loss to Cleveland in Week 10 puts a damper on what has been a very good stretch of games for them. It was a game they had opportunities to win. They did not. We'll get into a recap in a few minutes here, but let's round out our thought queue about this injury situation. Marlon Humphrey and Ronnie Stanley, both very key and very important pieces to the defense and the offense. Now, we talked about Ronnie Stanley a couple days ago, how the production wasn't Ronnie Stanley-esque considering what we've been known to see from him. But make no mistake about it. If Stanley has to miss a significant amount of time, miss any time, that's a big blow to this offense. And defensively, if Marlon Humphrey's done for the year, that puts some questions right back on the secondary that we had for them. Brandon Stevens has been awesome. Ronald Darby's made some plays, but Brock Yassin came in, gave up a big penalty, a couple other completions. We talked about him on Friday's episode as well. If these are injuries, again, we don't know this. We're talking here on Sunday evening for Monday's episode. But if John Harbaugh delivers some news on Marlon Humphrey and Ronnie Stanley that is not very positive, do you think the Ravens can survive without those guys, especially with the roster they've built right now?
It's going to be tough. I think, Rock Ya-Sin, if there's ever a time for him to step up, it's now. And it's befuddling to me how he gives up, plays that I think are, more routine-like plays that a corner should be in position to at least have a pass breakup. But it just seems like he's always the one getting passes completed on him. Obviously, Darby, we've seen him play, and he's held up fairly well. Had some plays as well himself, but for the most part, he's held up fairly well when called upon. But the Rock Ya-Sin one, that is a little bit more troubling just because he has more experience and he's been in other key games, and I think he's a guy where in the offseason they expected him to be the guy opposite of Marlon, and so now he might be in a, I think, corner rotation to help out. I don't know what his skill set is as far as coming to the line of scrimmage, because Marlon, the advantage of having Marlon, Millette, and Hamilton was that you could play any of them at the line of scrimmage. And by having them at the line of scrimmage, my God, man, you're talking easy peasy getting to the quarterback or being a run stuffer without, if you had to give a rush edge guy a break, and you have big nickel in the game, you didn't miss a beat. Now, that's something that is going to be in jeopardy as far as Mike McDonald and some of his defensive calls.
Yeah, and Baltimore has a lot of thinking to do, a lot of soul searching, honestly. And with these two injuries, if they do prove to be season-ending year injuries or just serious injuries, next man up mentality. It worked for him early in the season. We saw multiple guys step up, Brandon Stevens, Stone, et cetera, et cetera. We can go on about it. But now we're getting later in the season, and after a pretty good run of health ever since week 3, this game was definitely not ideal for them. But let's recap the game a little bit, Q. 33-31. The Ravens trailed for 0 minutes and 0 seconds in this game and still found a way to lose, which is creative, if anything else. First half, you're right. What was it? Second play of the game, Kyle Hamilton, pick sixes to Deshaun Watson. They get out to a 17-3 lead in the first quarter. Keaton Mitchell has the explosive run. You're thinking, all right, the Ravens are sitting pretty here, but the Ravens, after a 17-point first quarter, score 14 for the rest of the game. I think the whole thing is encapsulated by Cleveland's fourth and second half, honestly, where they put up 24 in the second half, 16 in the fourth quarter. Cleveland had a 10-minute drive. Baltimore was out physical to both offensively and defensively, as we talked about at the top of the show. Not a great day for Lamar, 13-23, 223, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. He grossly underthrew Rashad Bateman on a play. Also missed Zay Flowers on what would have been a deep shot touchdown. Where do you think this went wrong for the Ravens? I think there were a couple of turning points, especially when you talk about Marlon's injury. Also, I mean, you could say, well, James Prochet, Ravens legend, fumbles the ball and is still playing for the Ravens, it looks like. The Ravens go up 2 scores after one of the ugliest possessed sequences I've seen, penalties galore. And you're thinking, all right, the Ravens are up 2 scores. That should be the game, but they somehow find a way to lose it.
Yeah, again, I am scratching my head. I mean, what was it, the 4th game in NFL history or since the Super Bowl era where you had a team start off with the lead and wind up losing the game while never giving up the lead. So in the final waning seconds, you lose the game. And you talk about that game of inches. You talk about the Rashad Bateman miss. And, Lamar just recognizing he needed to put more velocity on the ball. Mother of pearl. You talk about like the one to Zay Flowers, it was the same end zone that the week previous against the Seahawks. Rashad Bateman runs by the guy twice on a 9 go route. And Lamar misses them. So those are 3 in that direction that were missed. And this is the National Football League. When you got a step, the way his receivers had a step on those guys, I mean, that is clearing away big play material touchdown. Like, there's no well, maybe, Lamar needs to figure out, this, that, or no, it wasn't any of that. It was like, you had a chance and you didn't take advantage of the chance. So that to me is something that is a head scratcher. But defensively, you talk about it. I mean, it was a 17 play, 10-minute drive. And I know, some of it was penalty oriented and all that, but when you needed stops, you just didn't get stops. And I'm just scratching my head on that one. That one was that to me, from a defensive output, that was the backbreaker, because if you stop them there, you get the ball back and now, you kind of gain back momentum, but they go to the sideline and they're like, they can't stop us. And that's where, credit just Cleveland's play calling, I think Kevin Stefanski and the rest of the, Alex Van Pelt is their offensive coordinator. And I played against Alex. He was a very aggressive quarterback at Pitt, and he's a very aggressive play caller current day. And I think they felt like, this ball club is they're leaking oil. And when I saw, as Amari Cooper, he casually just knifed right in the middle of the defense and turned around and presented himself, and it wound up being, a 18 or 20 yard jaunt right down the middle of the field to get inside the 5 yard line. I knew that was dooming the Ravens defense. It just didn't make sense. And again, I gotta credit, and give credit where credit's due for Cleveland. That was as good of a offensive resilient performance as there was. That was big, and that was disappointing.
The other part, to your point, you said, oh well, Cleveland was saying they can't stop us, and you're saying, well, this is like a figurative thing. It's just a saying, but they literally the Ravens could literally not stop them. There were multiple plays. David Njoku trucking Geno Stone for like 10 yards and Jerome Ford in the offensive line pushing the pile for an extra 15. Like, it just felt like Baltimore's heart wasn't in the game in the second half, because we've talked all season, Q, about how physical this defense is, how it feels like they're flying around the field and stopping. But with two backup tackles, their fourth and fifth string tackles in the game, felt like an underwhelming performance, especially when you're considering that they missed Deshaun Watson, 5 times, 6 times in the offensive backfield. He escapes, he scrambles. It's the stuff that is so frustrating for other defenses with Lamar Jackson, which, we were so close to getting them down. Well, I think Ravens fans experienced that on Sunday with the fact that Ravens defense could not get Deshaun Watson down. And coming up in the final part of the show, continue talking about just how the Ravens blew this game and a lot more. Stay tuned for that. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And FanDuel is awesome. If you've been thinking about joining, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options that include spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So, unfortunately for the Ravens, Lamar Jackson didn't have his best game on Sunday against Cleveland. If you bet Keaton Mitchell, him getting a touchdown, you're living large there, the over on yards too. So there'll be plenty of bets next week over on FanDuel for the Ravens and Bengals big Week 11 matchups. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We're back rounding out Locked On Ravens with Qadry Ismail. I am Kevin Oestreicher. This one is tough to swallow, especially because it's a divisional opponent. It's a game the Ravens got off to such a fast lead in, drops their divisional record now to 2-2, which in this division, the way the division's playing with the AFC as a whole is playing, you might look back on this game in late December, early January and go, man, I really wish the Ravens would have found a way to pull this one out. It's fourth quarter collapses, it's self-inflicted wounds. And the thing about this one, Q, is Cleveland played sloppy all day. That there were multiple missed opportunities by them, penalties that either kept Ravens drives alive or really hurt their own. The James Prochet muffed punt, it was just sloppy all around for them. And not that the Ravens didn't play sloppy themselves, but it just felt like there were so many missed opportunities that the Browns had that the Ravens then came right back and said, yeah, you're going to miss an opportunity. We're going to miss an opportunity too.
Well, the thing is, the missed opportunity is when you have the greatest kicker of all time and he's 1 for 4 this year from outside of 50 and now 1 for 5, but it wasn't necessarily because he had a chance to, get it past the line of scrimmage. They blocked it. It's like, what the heck? Like, I'm looking at the stats and it's like, you were 2 of 8 on third down and that's just, unacceptable. You look at the way in which, the Browns were just steady with rushing the football, 178 yards rushing. You talk about Ford just, he was determined. I mean, he ran well. And, that brotherly love push, like, golly, I get it. It's in the game and all that. And, man, you got to get them down. Like, you just can't assume the play is stopped. No, they're going to let it go. And we saw it in other games where the referees are like, hey, well, all right, if y'all do it on the 4th and 1, you could do it on this too. And I just think overall, Cleveland wanted it more. Deshaun Watson was hurt. I saw where his ankle twisted in. Jadeveon Clowney, he's like, oh boy, he helped him up the whole 9 yards. You're like, man, he goes in early at halftime just to get it looked at. But defensively, at the point of attack, they tried to get to Deshaun Watson, and that dude was elusive. And your rush lanes were poor. Your stunting wasn't good enough. You talk about their makeshift offensive line. If they all don't get game balls, I'll send them some game balls because they're deserving of it. That was a clinic for that offensive line to do what they did to help Deshaun Watson elude and evade a defense that was just as dominant as it was. But they gave up, 33 points, and they don't have anybody to blame but themselves.
Yeah, and a lot of it too. I mean, you can go back to that Odell play early in the third quarter, puts Baltimore up 24-9 at that point. And you're thinking, all right, the Browns have not scored a touchdown all day. They've gotten in the red zone, but haven't converted. They've gotten down there. It's all field goals. But it just felt like from that moment on, little things here and there trickled in. Like, for example, I mean, in this game, the Browns ran 25 more plays than the Ravens did, 75 compared to 50. And the Ravens almost beat them in yards, 373 compared to 306. I know it's about 70-yard difference, but still 25 plays. That's a decent amount of yards. Ravens averaged 6.1 yards per play compared to the Browns 5 yards. But Hugh, I think I'd be remiss if I did not mention Keaton Mitchell in this show at all. It's crazy. Keaton Mitchell showed so much over his first couple of touches, and then had it was like a negative 7-yard run and then a 2-yard run. So it wasn't like he was dynamic on every one of his touches, but he showed why he deserved to have more of a role. Now, the Keaton Mitchell thing, what happened was he had 4 total touches all game, averaged 16.5 yards per touch. The Ravens gave him 1 touch in the second half. Came with 2 minutes to go in the third quarter. The Ravens talked all week about, hey, you know what? He's earned the role. He showed it. He's showed it in like all the praise in the world. But they didn't act like it when it came in. Maybe they thought that they needed a bruising back against that Cleveland vaunted defensive line, but they didn't need a bruising back when Keaton Mitchell cut that ball up the field and used the speed to score a touchdown. They didn't need that bruising back when they threw a screen to him and he alleviated all those Ravens screen game woes. I'm a little lost, Q, because it wasn't like Gus Edwards was having the day of his life. He only averaged 2.6 yards per carry in this one, 11 carries for 24 yards was his stat line, 2.2, excuse me. That's what his yards per carry average was. So I'm just a little lost of why Keaton Mitchell don't get more touches, because I definitely think he deserved them.
Well, I mean, get in line, because I think that's something that you're going to hear from me as well. And I'd be curious to see, what Todd Monken was thinking. And the negative play was not necessarily him. That's Isaiah Likely's guy coming off the edge. I guess, you would credit Cleveland's defensive coordinator for calling a timed up run blitz off the weak side. But, Isaiah didn't do you any favors by, kind of opening up the door and the guy gets in. And, by the time Keaton secures the ball, you got a defender in your face. What do you want me to do? I mean, hold on to the ball and that's that. They get paid to play as well. I think, as far as Gus Edwards, I mean, he had good runs, although statistically the 2.2 doesn't really say he had good runs. It's just he didn't have, or any of them have volume runs 24 times, but you take away Lamar Jackson's 8, and now all of a sudden you're sitting there like, bruh, we just looked average. It was an average day for the running backs. I just think that, when you see 16 carries, it's like, what are we doing? Scratch your head. Like, are we involved? I think even out of the backfield, they try to get Keaton Mitchell the ball down the field, and it's kind of funny because when I saw him, it would have been great for him to catch that ball. Obviously, it's going to, probably more likely, since it's the NFL, probably go down as a drop. But the defender kind of got his hand shielded in a way, and he's a running back. He's not a receiver. He's not, taught how to make that kind of a play. But then again, if Lamar gets it out there a little bit further, maybe it's a different story. So there's a lot of what ifs, but we do know this. Unfortunately, they didn't commit to the run, and I think there were times where, I'm curious as to what Lamar was seeing and reading, because, there were times where he was just holding on to the ball an awful lot. He was extremely accurate coming into the game, but to only complete 13 passes, that's not getting it done. He did not have his best day.
Yeah, and I think with everything that went on, it just felt like a game Baltimore had, and they let continuously slip away. And I think it started in the second half, again, when Cleveland just started to out-physical them, and the mistakes that Cleveland made, Baltimore couldn't take advantage of, and the mistakes Baltimore made, Cleveland did take advantage of. And I know there's a lot of frustration right now, but what's your overall outlook on this team right now as we look ahead? Obviously, a huge game against the Bengals on Thursday night, I think, just got a lot bigger with some of the stuff we talked about earlier in the show. We kind of talked about if the Ravens can survive minus Marlon Humphrey and Ronnie Stanley if those injuries are in fact severe. But do you think this team is still okay, or are there things that really need to be worked on, or else it could bite them later in the year?
More than anything, I feel that what has stopped the Ravens has been the Ravens. Whether it's been injuries present day and even going to previous years, that is the elephant in the room, injuries. With that aside, I think this team is still full of swagger. I think this team is still full of talent to get it done. Clearly, one of the things that we didn't necessarily touch upon was the fact that Odell, he was only targeted twice, which, says what it says, but he takes a slant that was, he was pressed up man-to-man on the outside and runs a beautiful slant route and took it 40 to the house. So he dipped out on him. That was awesome. Again, there were times where, Mark Andrews, I thought, he only had 2 catches, but I get an advantage of watching the game in the press box, and you can see where Mark is like, bruh, I am open. What is he doing? The one where Zay Flowers should have hit him in stride, Mark was coming open as well down the field, and he was kind of like, what the heck? Oh, he threw it to Zay, and Zay, okay, Zay, it's an incompletion. So you could see just a tinge of frustration there, from your go-to tight end and receiver in, Mark Andrews. The one 18-yard comeback that Zay had was that was as textbook as it got. But my point is that the only team that seems to stop the Ravens in all 3 of their losses, it's the Baltimore Ravens, because Gardner Minshew didn't do anything. The Ravens did something. When you look at the Steelers didn't do anything. It was the slippery hands of the receiving corps. When you look at this game here, it was the D-line, O-line, and Todd Monken not allowing his dudes to run the ball, and Lamar Jackson throwing a pick 6. Those are all things that you caused. You're the one to look at when you say, how many losses do we have? Those 3? It's on us.
Yeah, it's a tough one to swallow for the Ravens. And again, that Thursday night game, huge now, is the Ravens will look to move their record to 8-3 and put more of a hold on that division. Bengals lose on Sunday, but obviously Browns and Steelers both win. Q, I appreciate you hopping on with me. Thanks so much for breaking everything down. Hopefully next week, a bounce back performance will be in order as this Ravens team hopes to beat the Bengals and end up sweeping them for, I think, what would be a huge, huge win, and it could go a long way later in the year.
Looking forward to it. I think this is a critical point. I said it, before, that these 2 games are must-win games. Well, you didn't get it done. You gotta split these 2 games, and Cincinnati, boy, what a perfect opportunity to kind of reestablish yourself, and literally because they lost to the Texans, I think this is an opportunity to put a dagger by sweeping Cincinnati into their hopes as far as playoff seeding and such.
Yeah, it's such a big game now, and hopefully the Ravens can pull it out. But Q, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Thank you for tuning in to Locked On Ravens. Be sure to subscribe in video form, audio form, as well as subscribe on subtext, the whole 9 yards. We'll be back here, whether it is tomorrow or later in the day, talking about the updates to Marlon Humphrey and Ronnie Stanley and a lot more about this Ravens and Browns matchup. So be sure to stay tuned with that. I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.